Welcome to the first episode of Family Peace Initiative's Curriculum Blips. In this podcast, we provide fast and easy resources for facilitators using the FPI suite of curricula to help you prepare before stepping into a group room. Whether you're brand new to BIP facilitation or using drive time to refresh yourself on familiar concepts, these blips are intended to help you get in the right frame of mind as you head into group. You'll hear from seasoned staff and FPI curricula authors on the key concepts and goals of each lesson, as well as what to expect from group members in these conversations. In today's episode, Family Peace Initiative's co-founder and co-director Steve Halley starts us off right at the very top by talking about the orientation process.
I absolutely love doing orientations for the Family Peace Initiative curriculum. It's such an interesting process to see people come, and it's after the assessment that they've completed, it's really their first engagement into the actual material. And people come activated. They come afraid, they come anxious, they come in a protected kind of stance. And the process of helping people to feel safe and to relax and considering is really a fun process if the facilitator understands how it all plays out and what they're trying to get to. But if we know that people come with that kind of emotionally activated and a protective stance, the first thing we start out with is the paperwork, which doesn't help really to create safety. And here we are explaining to them the participation agreement and all these things that in reality, they're not going to remember most of that, weeks later because they're not in their thinking brain. They're just trying to figure out how to navigate. So it's important to understand, first of all, that people will not remember their participation agreement, and so we have to go back and revisit that and help them to remember the expectations around payment and attendance and, just agreements about how to maneuver in the program. But once we get into the orientation proper, the way I approach things is really by storytelling. And I start with a story about how I got into this work. And what I discovered very early on as I got into this work is that I had a lot to learn. And it has been a very long, arduous process of learning how to apply the material in the Family Peace Initiative program to our individual lives and to my life in particular. And so I'm trying to start out very humble and saying, you're not the only one here learning, I'm learning too, and we're all in this together. And I was never perfect in my relationships, but as I have been able to apply some of the content of this program, my relationships have gotten better with not only my wife and my son, but with my coworkers and colleagues. It's made a difference for me. And I'm saying all this because I want them to hear that this isn't just a class, it is kind of a way of life that affects all of us. And so we're really not us against them, and I'm not the person with all the answers. We're just all working this together. And so welcome to the process. I always make sure to tell them that if it was me coming to the orientation, that I would come mistrusting. I wouldn't trust what was going on. I would think it was just a hoop that people had to jump through, that I had to just pay this money and give up this time. And I want to validate their reaction, that it's okay to feel that way. And so initially it's up to me as the facilitator to show them that there's value to being here. And so I'm trying to communicate to them as much as possible that the pressure is off of you. Nothing you're doing is weird, that you should be here being cautious, being protective, and it would be normal to be mistrusting. And it's up to me to show you that there is something here for you and that, that maybe we can be trusted. And the sooner our participants recognize that, the more they're going to learn, the more they're going to gain as a part of the process. But the first step, from the orientation forward is for me to show them that we are credible. As soon as they see there's credibility here, then things begin to change. So I start with the story of myself, my own learning process, and then we get into the definitions on the board, which is where I had to start, was what are these definitions, right? What does it even mean to say abusive or violence or physical violence? What does the word cruelty mean? And we're doing that by building lists. And these lists are so simple, but so magical in that we're not asking people what they have done. We're just asking them to build lists of examples of abuse, of violence, of physical violence. And just kind of from a third person perspective of if someone was going to be abusive, what would be some categories? And we don't need to be exhaustive. We don't need 20 ways that someone is abusive. We really just need kind of the big 4 or 5, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, verbal abuse. If we have those 5 on the board, that's enough. Because I can then talk about an example of how I've been emotionally abusive or verbally abusive, and then we can just ask them, how about you? Have you used any of these behaviors in your relationships? The list helps in ownership, and I'll do them one at a time. We'll do the physical abuse, move to the violence, and then we move to the physical violence, and we're just building lists under each one of those all the way through cruelty, which is the blatant disregard or the intentional infliction of pain and suffering. And what I've found is that the more I can lead by example, the more I can take ownership of some of my behaviors before I ask them to take ownership of their behaviors, they're more likely to acknowledge their behaviors under any of those separate lists. And that's what I'm after. I'm putting check marks on the board of what behaviors they're willing to own. Have you ever been verbally abusive? Well, yeah, I have probably yelled and screamed, thanks. Have you ever called a name? Have you ever been emotional? Yeah, and if they say yes, it's just thank you and putting check marks on the board. And as we do this, as we build all these lists with all these check marks, in the end, we're all looking at this board and seeing this tremendous number of check marks on the board, and we're acknowledging, and without really being directly confronted about it, we're acknowledging our own abuse, violence, and physical violence. And we're just looking at the check marks represent, right, not only the cruelty that we've done to people, but they are evidence, they're red flags of cruelty that happened to us. And it's important that we make that connection. So we want to make the connection that look at these check marks. They are evidence of unresolved cruelty. And so the first axiom of, the river of cruelty is, whenever we have this, behavior of cruelty toward others, that it's almost always evidence of cruelty that we experienced long before we were cruel. And that's the goal. Once they see that, then we can say, who was cruel to you before you were ever cruel to anybody? And that often takes them back to their early childhood years when they were experiencing some form of mistreatment. It will take them back to their father, their mother, their stepfather, their schoolmates, their friends, their siblings, somebody. And most likely when they answer that question, they will be telling you something that very few people in the world have ever heard come out of their mouths. This is information that nobody has asked them in that way. And it's important to be very honoring and thankful and full of gratitude for the fact that you were the one that they chose to share that information with, as opposed to, somebody else in the world. And so working through that, the goal of the orientation is really two things: to get some check marks on the board, ownership of cruel behaviors that they've done in their relationships, and for them to be able to share something about who was cruel to them before they were ever cruel to somebody else. Because those two pieces of information, I believe, are evidence that they're taking steps deeper into the relationship that they have with you and have with the program. And the other thing, the last thing I want to really point out is that I always ask people at the end, was I successful in getting you to think about things differently than you have thought about it in the past? And 90% of the time, they're going to say, oh yeah, I've never thought about those definitions. I never thought about cruelty in that way. I never thought about that my childhood was impacted by, is impacting my future. It never occurred to me. And then I will tell them that our goal is to help them think about things differently, consider things differently each week. And while I can't guarantee it will happen every week, that is our mission. And if we can successfully start exploring our own lives in a new way, then we end up individually creating our lives more the way we want them to, and not the way somebody else is expecting it to be. And so good luck with doing these orientations. I really look forward to those sessions with people because it's their first experience with the Family Peace Initiative curriculum. And their first experience, I want them to walk out of there going, wow, I hadn't thought about it like that before.
Thanks for preparing for your group with us today. If you have questions, stucks, or if there's a section of the curriculum you'd like to hear us explore in more detail, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at reception@familypeaceinitiative.com or submit a contact form on our website. Family Peace Initiative, working to serve our clients and community with compassion, integrity, and expertise.